When he joined, within about 9 months, he was working with L. Ron Hubbard out in California. And L. Ron Hubbard was shooting movies, and David worked there as a cameraman shooting these movies. He rose up through the ranks. He's a tough kid and smart.
He just became known as a doer, like a guy who'll get it done. No excuses, no stops, get it done. So he had made a name for himself in the CMO by the time Hubbard went off into seclusion, essentially hiding from lawsuits. Now, by the time Hubbard went off into seclusion, Miscavige had sort of already risen up through the ranks of the Sea Organization.
David Miscavige got himself into a position where he had communication with L. Ron Hubbard that nobody else had. And it gave him enormous authority to be telling L. Ron Hubbard that people were doing things or this was happening, and couching everything in the framework that made him look good and anybody who he felt was a rival look bad.
So if Miscavige wanted to get rid of somebody, all he had to do was feed LRH false information that this person had been caught doing something treasonous. Mm-hmm. And then he would get in response some order from L. Ron Hubbard to get rid of this person. So are there so many similarities between various communist regimes and fascist regimes?
Well, Hitler did the same thing when he became the supreme leader. He had to take power. Yeah, he had to wait for the president to die. But the whole time there's a control of information and a slow aggregation of power. Of course, with nations it's different because if you control the military, you control a lot. So you have to also get the generals on your side and so on. But I'm sure in this situation there is similar kind of dynamics. You have to get certain people on your side, control the flow of information, let the original founder, the original leader die off.
Yeah.
And make sure that you are the one that's left with the power.
Right.
Thank you. My name is David Miscavige, and I'm very happy that you could all make it to this important briefing this evening. Over the past 6 years, LRH has indeed been intensively researching the upper bands of OT. Approximately 2 weeks ago, he completed all of his research as he had set out to do. L. Ron Hubbard completed everything he set out to do and more. He has now moved on to his next level of OT research. This level is beyond anything any one of us ever imagined. This level is in fact done in an exterior state. At this level of OT, the body is nothing more than an impediment and encumbrance to any further gain as an OT. Thus, at 2,000 hours Friday, the 24th of January, AD 36, L. Ron Hubbard discarded the body he had used in this lifetime for 74 years, 10 months, and 11 days. Although you may feel grief, understand that he did not and does not now.
I think the quote, sometime it gets attributed to David Miscavige, is power is not given, it is assumed.
After the death of L. Ron Hubbard, Miscavige set about consolidating his power as the undisputed heir to Hubbard. He started removing from their positions anybody who was in the hierarchy and was a recognized figure in Scientology, starting with Mary Sue Hubbard. He subsequently got rid of Dee Dee and Gail Riesdorf, Pat and Annie Broker, and everybody connected to them and everybody that might have been allied to them.
I observed him dismantling and putting himself gradually into the position where he was the senior most person aside from LRH. And I saw Miscavige becoming more and more authoritative and more able to remove people, regardless of position.
And he's a very charismatic guy, and he can get people to follow him, and this is what he did.
There was a pretty infamous meeting that happened between Miscavige and Mary Sue. Were you around for that?
I was around for that in a very peculiar way. I put a wireless microphone on Miscavige, and they went into a hotel in LA to meet with Mary Sue and whatever entourage was with her. And I was sitting in the van with these giant reel-to-reel recorders, recording everything through these two microphones, unbeknownst to Mary Sue.
For what?
So that he could record this meeting with Mary Sue that was to argue her into submission, and basically DM would take charge and she would resign and step down.
And did she put up a fight, or?
I heard some pretty vociferous objections coming out of her mouth. Can't really tell you what she was saying, but it was obviously directed at him.
David Miscavige.
And some disagreement and name calling happening, yeah.
What happened to Mary Sue?
Well, she went to prison, right?
Right.
Ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
And she just sort of ended up being put in a position of having really no say or power, and quietly lived off her life until she died. And then I remember the takedown, the Dee Dee and Gail days. Dee Dee and Gail Riesdorf, they were at one point in charge of the CMO. They were the commanding officer and the deputy commanding officer, respectively. Basically, they're in there with Gail, and it's Miscavige and Gail one-on-one. And he basically talks her into submission. And then Miscavige would ultimately take out Pat Broker.
By the time Hubbard went off into seclusion, he took two other CMO, or I'm going to call them messengers, right? Commodore's messengers. He took two other messengers with him, Pat and Annie Broker. Now, it has been said by people, Mike Rinder has told me, he goes, the reason Pat and Annie went off with LRH isn't necessarily because he desperately wanted them to, but partly because we could afford to let them go. We didn't necessarily need them.
Sure.
Okay. And between the two of them, Annie was the one who was like a really compassionate person, intelligent person, caring person.
Was there a possible trajectory of this world where she was the one that took over?
Yes. In fact, Pat and Annie Broker were the two people that were supposed to take over. Mm-hmm. Okay.
The day after L. Ron Hubbard passed, there was this new flag order that came out, and it was the introduction of Pat and Annie Broker. And we were like, so now we know who's in charge.
Then when did it change?
The next day. I was part of the people that had to go around and collect all these issues and account for every single one of them. All those little pictures, all these pictures, taking them off notice boards out of people's pockets. I had to get it, and we shred them and destroy them.
And who gave you that order?
RTC. I just got an order.
And then all of a sudden one day, Miscavige shows up, and it's like a raid. And I was there, and there was, I don't know, a dozen other people, the best and the best, pretty much picked by Broker. Everyone gets corralled up except me. I mean, everyone except me. Miscavige comes out after yelling and screaming with these guys, and he says, you know what's happening with those guys, JB? They're all going to the f***ing RPF.
Dave himself drove up in this van, this black van, one night. This is like 2 a.m. that I was told he was coming. I didn't know he was coming with. And all these people pour out. Dave hand-delivered these people to me. And I had to go down there and meet him. He gave me the lowdown. You need to make sure these people don't go anywhere. You need to guard them. So I had to write up daily reports on their activities. The things that they physically did, the stuff that they say, the stuff that they talked about, I had to report on.
The end result was Pat Broker somehow was brought to the agreement that he would just live a simple life and go off his merry way, having nothing to do with Scientology.
They had been ushering just suitcases of cash to L. Ron Hubbard during this time. And, you know, so you have Miscavige handing boatloads of cash to Pat Broker. Pat would do crazy things like hide the money in the walls of houses and dig pits and everything. So Miscavige basically threatened to turn Pat Broker over to the IRS for tax evasion.
So that pressure basically shut them down. And with them not being able to dispute the facts, nobody was in any position to challenge him.
Annie was convinced to divorce, disconnect, have nothing to do with Pat, which she did.
It was a clever and calculated move that Miscavige made. At the time, Pat and Annie Broker had been isolated from the world. They lived literally in seclusion with no outside contact. Miscavige had an organization and people that supported him, including a whole bunch of lawyers.
All of Scientology's attorneys and accountants and lobbyists and whatever, they all know Dave. Dave's the one they deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knows Pat and Annie. Everybody knows Dave.
That's how he took out Broker, and then ultimately that put him in the position where there was no one else in the way. And now he was chairman of the board, Religious Technology Center, the top of RTC. He was where he wanted to be. David Miscavige is the one. He was now invincible.